monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where we explore the unexplained live on YouTube. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, coming to you within a cannon shot of historic Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So the Phantoms and Monsters Radio channel is made possible by you liking, subscribing, and sharing our programming. And super chat donations are essential for us to continue offering you our unique content. So your consideration is very much needed and appreciated. So tonight I had W.T. Watson, who is a coffee addict and writer of both fiction and nonfiction. He infuses his work with his expertise in cryptozoology, monster lore, magic, Forteana, and the paranormal. He brings a unique shamanic and magical perspective to all his work for over 30 years of exploration into these topics. When he is not writing or reading about monsters, he can be found outdoors allowing his dogs to take him for a walk around the neighborhood in Kitchener, Ontario. He lives with his spouse, Stacey, in the townhouse that would be jammed with books if it weren't for the e-reader. Travis recently published a book with Beyond the Fray Publishing titled Mysteries in the Mist, Fog, and Clouds in the Paranormal. So, Travis, thanks again for joining me this evening.
Well, thanks for having me, Lon. I really look forward to having this opportunity to chat with you and with your listeners. So, looking forward to it.
Well, let's see. Mysteries in the Mist, Fog, and Clouds in the Paranormal. Okay. Tell us about it. What inspired this book?
So, as you know, because you had me on the show when that book came out too, I wrote a book on phantom black dogs. Mm-hmm. It's called Phantom Black Dogs, Walkers of the Liminal Way. And there are a couple of input streams for this book. The first was some stories that I ran across when I was doing my black dog research. The one that stood out for me is this gentleman was an editor, one of the first editors for the Oxford English Dictionary. And he and his family were on holiday in the mountains of England. And as happens in that area, they got socked in by fog. Now, those of us who spend some time in the outdoors know that if you can't see where you're going, you stop. But apparently this gentleman didn't get that bulletin. So he was trying to blunder his way along the fog. And long and short of it is that the classic phantom black dog, the large black dog with the glowing eyes and the whole schmear, appears in front of him and blocks his way, refuses to let him pass. And he tries to go around this thing. He tries to go forward, and it just won't move. The fog clears, and lo and behold, this dog had been preventing him from walking off a cliff. So this is a good example of the phantom black dog in its guardian aspect, which is something I talk about a lot in the other book. So that was one thing. I was like, oh, that's interesting. There's that fog thing. There were a couple of other stories where black dogs appeared from the fog. If you remember, we talked about the one where the gentleman was out and he hears this black dog coming. You can hear this howling, right? And he beats feet for the house and runs back in and locks the door. His father seems to be made of sterner stuff and goes upstairs and looks out the window. And yep, sure enough, there's a black dog sitting out in his front yard. So this old boy decides he's going to ventilate this thing. Gets out his fowling piece, his bird gun, basically, and fires several shots at this animal and only succeeds in ventilating his toilet. But again, dog appears from the mist, right?
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So I've got thinking about that. The other stream that got me thinking about fog and mist and clouds and the paranormal was a personal experience. I had a friend. I call him Nate in the book. It's not his name. I haven't seen him in years, and wouldn't presume to have permission to use his name. But Nate was. This is back in the 80s, right? Nate was one of the original goth kids. He was the guy who wore black and was known to wear black fingernail polish and the eyeliner and the whole schmear, right? And grew his hair out into the classic heavy metal headbanging look and the whole bit, right? It was also, and this is something you'd be interested in, was dabbler in the occult, right? So stress on dabbler. So Nate told me a story where he got up in the middle of the night and felt compelled to get up in the middle of the night and went into the hallway of his apartment where there hung a mirror. And as he tells it, when he looked at this mirror, and again, this could be a dream state, he could have been out of body, who the heck knows. But when he looked at this mirror, he saw fog swirling in the mirror. And he felt compelled to enter the mirror. Fortunately for him, his girlfriend was staying over that night, and apparently he made enough noise to wake her up. She jumps out of bed. She comes into the hallway. She finds him with his face literally plastered against this mirror, as though he's actually trying to just walk into this thing. She pulls him away from the mirror. She lets him go. He tries to go back to the mirror, but she finally succeeds in getting him back to bed and settled back down. And he remembers almost nothing about this in the morning. But it comes back to him as she starts to describe it to him. The upshot of this is that he put away a lot of those books that he'd been reading and decided maybe this wasn't a fun thing to do. So we had the mist motif there as well. So I got thinking as I was doing the research for Phantom Black Dogs, and I was about to finish this book up, and I was thinking, I wonder how many paranormal stories, and I use paranormal in a very broad sense of the word, as anything outside the normal, not just ghosts, but anything, Sasquatches and whatever. I wonder how many of these paranormal stories actually have a mist component to them, a fog component to them. So I started doing some research, and lo and behold, I went down the rabbit hole. There are a lot. In fact, there are so many of them that I would, I talk in the book about Jenny Randall's and the Oz effect, and the idea that, paranormal experiences can be accompanied by things like the silence, which we all have heard of that. A feeling that something's about to happen, and that feeling that time is not running as it should. Either missing time, or time goes too fast, time goes too slow, that kind of thing. I, after reading a lot of the stories in this book, decided that maybe we should add a fourth thing to that list and say that if you see any kind of a strange fog or mist when you get that feeling that something's about to happen, it might be time to go the other direction. Because there are some stories in the book. I had a lot of fun researching this, because instead of just one topic like the Phantom Black Dog book, I got to talk about everything. There are cryptids in this book. There are UFOs in this book. There are, alien abductions. There's fairy lore. There's, if you have an interest in the paranormal, you're probably going to find something in this book that you're going to like.
I think if you go in my search tool on my blog and put fog or mist in there, you're going to come up with a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I used a couple of stories.
It's so much. It's so many incidents that encompasses, and when I think of that, the first thing I think about is the story of the gray man of Ben McDoy in the
Oh, yes.
fog,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that was kind of the epitome to me of and nobody even knows if it's actually a specter or an actual real being.
Yeah. I mean, nobody really knows. This mountain has a reputation for being, quote, haunted.
Yeah.
However you want to put that, by a large supposedly bipedal gray man.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about the stories is that, yes, this being seems to use fog as cover, but the people that encounter this thing don't usually actually see the creature, they hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So they get the footsteps and that feeling of being followed, the time displacement and all that stuff. The thing I found really interesting about this is that in the gray man stories, almost invariably what happens is that the individual encounters this creepiness, and then they make a run for it. Now, again, if you've done any time outdoors, running on a mountainside is not a recommended activity.
Oh, I can attest to that.
Yeah, all of these people made it down from this mountain in one piece, despite panicking and fleeing for their lives, basically. And the evidence that there was something on the mountain with them is pretty sparse, but it's stuff that you would see in like Sasquatch encounters. I mean, we've all seen the shows and so forth where there's the sound of footsteps, the feeling of being followed, da 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 da. Whether we can attest to that being an actual physical creature or something else, who knows? So we have the same circumstance, but this is in Great Britain, which is not a place that has a lot of forest cover. And certainly this mountainside, if you've seen pictures of it, doesn't have any forest cover until you get down into
practically
lower
all
elevations.
rock.
It's just a big rock.
Yeah.
So what were these people encountering? And the gray man had a cousin in Wales. It's called the Monarch of the Mists, which again is reputed to cause people that trespass on its domain to either disappear or have terrible accidents. This thing always strikes me as being more of a type of a fairy or earth spirit type creature, because that's kind of the reputation that it has. The interesting thing is that there is a story from a town in Wales that's not too far from the mountains where this being is supposed to hold sway, where a fellow's out walking his dog one day, and he encounters this large, he described it as a gorilla in the brush. Of course, the dog freaks out, and then he realizes that he has company. And he freezes and goes, "Oh my God, what is this thing?" Blah, blah, blah. It scared him so bad, he reported it to the police. And the interesting part about the story is that the local constabulary took this absolutely seriously, and even issued a statement that they would be investigating this quote unquote Yeti sighting in the area, that they took these things seriously, and that they'd be increasing patrols in that area. Now, you have to wonder, how many people have been seeing weird things in this area that the cops are just like, "Oh yeah, somebody else saw a Yeti over there. We better send some cars over that direction."
That's an interesting point that you bring up. And I have found that, especially in Wales, as opposed to the other countries in UK, that the local authorities take a lot of this stuff serious. I mean, as far as cryptids or whatever. I mean, if somebody sees something, they don't normally poo-poo it. They look into it. And, I've always thought that to be fascinating.
Yeah, you have to wonder if they ever actually caught something.
Well,
and that's what convinced them, and of course the Welsh people have a long tradition of fairy lore, dating back to who knows how long. And so, they're one of the Celtic peoples that lives, cheek by jowl with what they call the people of peace, or the little ones, or whatever they want to call them that week. And I think that maybe alters their perception of, reality isn't as solid as we think it is.
Right.
They also have a strong tradition of the second sight in those countries, so clairvoyance. So.
I got a question here earlier on here, and it's a good question. Nancy Malcolm asked about the cities in the clouds that people report. I know there was a famous case in China. I have a few that were reported to me about people that would be out in the Hudson River or even on the ferry, the Staten Island ferry. He would look into the clouds and see the city in the clouds. Did you look into any of those sightings at all?
I didn't do that in the research for this book, but I do know I was looking more for monsters in the mist, I guess.
Okay.
But because when you do a book like this, at some point you have to start saying, okay, look, I don't have room for this.
Well, I get it. Oh, I understand. Yeah.
You've done your, I know you've got several books out where you've taken sighting information and so forth, and you have to pick and choose.
Yeah.
But these Cloud City things, I know that the conventional scientific explanation is that it's some kind of a mirage.
Yeah.
Maybe. I tend to be a both and thinker. I've always said, for instance, with Sasquatch, it's like I'm perfectly happy if there's a relic hominid or a large bipedal ape running around in the woods out there somewhere. That would be fine with me. But I think there's something far stranger going on as well. And I think it just depends on who's seeing this creature as to what kinds of things they're dealing with. But the same thing with this Cloud City. Maybe a mirage. There may be an infection layer that's causing people to see a part of a city at some distance from them. I know that that's possible meteorologically. But I'm a mystic and an animist, and like you say at the beginning in your intro, you talk about monsters, but I live in a world full of spirits. They're everywhere. So I don't, in Jinn lore, for instance, you encounter the idea that the Jinn have their own civilization, basically, and that they have cities and that they have social ranking and so forth. Who's to say that under the right circumstances, you're not looking at the dwelling of some spirit race? Call them fairy, call them Jinn, call them whatever. In my view, the spirit realm is so multitudinous that we only really have names for a fraction of the things that could possibly be seen out there. So, I'm a both and kind of thinker. It could be a mirage. Some of them could be mirages. Some of them could be something more. Some of them could be instances of spontaneous psychism, where somebody, perhaps, you're talking about somebody riding a ferry. Maybe you're looking in the water, you get a little tranced out, you have a little latent psychic ability, and boom, you see something in the clouds. I don't have a problem with that either. So there's lots of ways that these cities could be explained. Some more acceptable to the scientific establishment than others, but it's one of the fun things about these.
It's an interesting phenomenon. It really is. I have seen pictures of what people have taken of these things, and and it's it's no dispute. It looks like an actual city skyline in a lot of these images. So now you did talk about man wolves, which is interesting because we're getting involved with a big case. I think potential big case now.
Yeah, you've been on the forefront of that particular.
We tried
particularly in Pennsylvania. You guys between you and Linda Godfrey, I've got all the man-wolf stories I could ever wish for. And to be fair, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of my favorite cryptids. If I had to pick a favorite, if I was going to run into anything, I think a man-wolf would be an interesting thing to see. But
yeah,
yeah,
we're looking into one now. It just started, but it may be a big case. I don't know. We'll see. Speaking of the man wolves, are just you talked about Linda and the Beast of Bray Road. The gentleman who owns that farm there, Lee Hemphill, he talked about these beings manifesting out of these mist and things disappearing out of these mist and associated with the Beast of Bray Road.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the original Beast of Bray Road witnesses, I think it was Doris. I don't remember the last name, but foggy night, encounters this thing coming out of the fog. So almost immediately upon this thing starting to make itself known, we get that fog instance. And that happened on more than one occasion. There was a story of a lady who was driving in California, I believe, and going to work, and arrives at work a blithering mess because this creature, this man-wolf creature, came out of the fog and actually jumped on the hood of her car. Scared the bejesus out of her, of course, and jumped on the hood of the car and then jumped off. And of course, she took off, got to work, and she was just a mess. And the fellow who actually wrote to Linda and gave her the story, had to basically translate for her because she didn't want to talk about it anymore. But he got the story from her the day that it happened. So, so again, and one of the things that I talk about in the book is that it seems like some of these creatures are either using the mist as maybe a camouflage, which would make sense for something like a wolf is an ambush predator. So one presumes that a man wolf would behave in much the same way. So using fog as cover, you always see man wolves appearing from cornfields. It's like, what a great place to hide, right? Cornfields, fog, nobody would see this thing coming. And so you see that, and then we talked about the monarch of the mist, the gray man materializing or being heard in the fog. So in some instances, it seems like these creatures are using the fog for cover. They're using it as a camouflage. Now, they may also be using it as camouflage for how they got there. If we start to go down the rabbit hole of talking about portals or window areas or whatever it is you want to call it, I like to think of them as portals. Then, it may be that the fog is something that happens as the result of one of these things opening, or it comes through the opening and helps to cover whatever's coming through. Entirely possible. Especially if you start to think about, these beings coming through and taking on a more solid form. So, you
talked about in the book, you had a chapter about flying beings. What beings in particular were you talking about?
I was looking at flying humanoids when I first started, but and there's the Arseana story from Ken Gerhard in the book. That's basically this fellow's a scientist. He's out doing exploration for the Geographical Society for Russia. He's in a remote mountain region. And again, he's walking with his dog along a riverbank, deep fog, and he hears the flapping of large wings and sees something indistinct in the fog moving away from him. He'd heard a disturbance in the bush. being a brave sort of fellow, he thought he might flush this thing out, so he threw a rock at it, and then something large and winged took off from the underbrush. Now, he didn't actually see a humanoid, but when he went back to talk to the native people in his camp, they were all like, "Oh yeah, we know what that is." It's like, okay, what was it? It's just, oh, it's this guy. We see him every now and again. He has wings. He flies around. Sometimes we'll see tracks, and the tracks will walk along for a few steps, and then they'll disappear. Because he took off. They were very nonchalant about it.
That's interesting because we've run into that phenomena.
Oh yeah,
with J.C. Johnson and I. When we used to talk about these tracks disappearing.
Four Corners was famous for that stuff.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, what the hell is sprouting wings and taking off? It's
yeah, it's either sprouting wings and taking off, or it's walking through into another dimension.
Well, it's going into a portal or something. Yeah. Absolutely,
something like that.
Yeah, because we had a case out there actually in the reservation of a winged humanoid that everybody said looked like the Jeepers Creepers.
Oh yeah,
monster.
I remember that one.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'll be honest with you. With all these winged beings and winged humanoids and stuff that we've been working on, I don't really recall, though I may be wrong, of anything involving mist or any type of fog associated with it. I could be wrong, but
there was some in one of the original Mothman sightings, and I mentioned this in the book. There's mention of the creature disappearing into like a fog or dust cloud. That was about the only thing that I came up with as far as Mothman goes. I think it's in the miscellaneous section of the book. But the other interesting, so there was a flying humanoid story. There was also a great story in the book about pterodactyls in the mist. This fellow's, he's surfing, and this guy must be really freaking dedicated because it is cold. He's wearing, a dry suit and the whole smear, but the water is really, really cold, and he's out doing his thing, and the fog rolls in, and he swears that this thing knocked him off his surfboard. He was a pretty good sized guy, worked in a body shop, was pretty buff, right? And he says this thing took him right off his surfboard, knocked him into the water. And he got a good look at it when he came up. And, it was the classic pterodactyl with or I guess they call it a pterodon.
Pterosaur, pterodon.
Pterosaur, with the head ridge and the bat wings and the interesting coloring and so forth. Said this thing went right over the top of him. And of course, nobody else saw it. Even though he was surfing with a buddy, nobody else saw it because of the fog. So did he actually see a pterosaur? Was he seeing the ghost of a pterosaur? Was he having a spontaneous psychic event where he, went back in time? Was he time traveling for a minute? Who knows? But it was a great story because he remembers this thing actually taking him off the surfboard. Wow. So those are a couple of the flying things that appeared in the book.
I just want to thank Peace for their donation. Much appreciated. The pterosaur thing, that whole thing freaks me out anyway. I've gotten a lot of reports about those things for years now. And I've had all kinds of people give me their interpretation of what it is. Of course, the people have seen these traditionally in Papua New Guinea, the Ropins, and then you had the 1903 sightings in Van Meter, Iowa. Yep. And then every place else in between. It seems like the Midwest in particular, going in for the Midwest up into the upper Midwest, seems to be a flyway, or seems to be an area where a lot of these are seen at.
Yeah, and then down into the mountains of Mexico.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, where they take these things pretty much for granted. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, there are witches flying around. We have
Oh my God.
pterosaurs.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. The
you just
flying
got to be
witches.
careful when you go outside because you never know what might be flying around out there.
Yeah, that whole flying witch thing down in Monterey and down
Oh
there, those
man,
areas
yeah.
there. We've all seen the videos, and
Mhm.
you look at it and you think, well, it looks like somebody's on some type of device or something. But
Yeah,
as you're looking at it, and you think, well, why in the hell are they out there in the middle of nowhere, out in
yeah.
these mountains, flying around this thing? So
Yeah, but then there's the case of that one police officer who
yeah,
got the living bejesus scared out of him by this thing and actually lost consciousness. It scared him so bad.
that's right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
he attested to it. I
now,
mean, he said this
yeah,
thing dropped right in front of him.
and
I think
I've
he
known
quit
a
the
lot
force
of
too, to be honest with you.
I've known a lot of cops in my life.
Right.
I worked in security for in my younger years and had frequent interactions with law enforcement, and I just can't ever picture any of the cops that I've known, going ah. But so this thing must have scared the crap out of him.
Yeah. Well, if it's what he said it looked like, it probably would have scared the crap out of me too. I mean, I've seen a lot of things, but I don't know about that. That would probably do it for me.
I think I'd probably be,
What is one of the
covering.
most unbelievable stories or events or incidents that you've come up with of this?
So, I was afraid that somebody was going to ask this question.
Well, it would be me.
Because there are a bunch of stories in this book that will make you go, what? They did what? But probably my favorite set of stories in the book, I have a whole series called Mysterious Myths because, like I said, I talk about the cryptids, I talk about UFOs, I talk about, flying things and fairies and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a whole section of stories that I found that don't really relate to a being.
Mm-hmm.
They're just weird clouds. Okay. So my favorite story, and you may or may not find this unbelievable. My favorite story, and it's because it has kind of a personal thing to me. I was a big fan of the $6 Million Man when I was a kid, right?
Okay.
Remember that show?
Oh yeah.
So
I'm a child of the '70s, so I remember.
Yeah. You remember Martin Caidin? We're probably of an age. Martin Caidin, the guy who wrote Cyborg, which is the book that the $6 Million Man was based on, had an experience. Caidin, in addition to being a best-selling author, was also a pilot. He was a naval pilot. And in this particular circumstance, he and about 6 other naval aviators were flying an advanced, I forget the exact type of aircraft, but it's one of those types of aircraft that they use for surveillance. So it's got all the radars and drones, or bells and whistles and electronic navigation and sat nav and all that fun stuff, right? Just a complete suite of electronic countermeasures and all that kind of fun thing. So he and this group of pilots are flying this aircraft back across the Atlantic from Europe, and they are coincidentally in what we think of as the Bermuda Triangle. Well, Caidin was not flying when this happened. He was actually observing, but he was on deck with the pilots. And he says that he looked to his right and the wing of the aircraft disappeared. This fog, this cloud that they came into was so thick that he could not see the wing of the aircraft. And they flew into this cloud and literally lost all navigational instruments, all electronics, all radio, everything went dead. They had to fly the airplane by dead reckoning. And if this had not been a seasoned group of aviators, people who, had been flying for years and years, there's no telling what would have happened because they didn't have altitude measurements or anything. They had lost all instrumentation and they couldn't see anything. They were flying blind trying to get this aircraft out of this cloud. And they continued to fly blind for 20 minutes or so, I believe.
Wow.
They finally emerged from the cloud. And as soon as they came out of this thing, everything came back online. And they discovered that they had covered a significant distance in that time. So that was pretty unbelievable.
It sounds like, a few of those Bermuda Triangle stories you hear from these pilots where they they go into a fog or a mist or into a cloud, and when they lose all control and of the gauges and such, and everything is spinning around and going crazy, and they end up like 100, 200 miles out off course or something like that. It's like you're going into a time slip or something.
Yeah, or they end up farther along their flight path than they should be. There's a story in the book about that. The really incredible ones to me are the teleportation stories, though.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple of stories out of a place called Bahia Blanca. I think it's in Argentina. And my favorite is this fellow is a businessman. He's the dude who's traveling on business, and he's at this hotel. He goes out to his new car, and he starts to drive away off to wherever it was he was going for his next business stop. He drives into this cloud, and his car dies. Typical thing. It's like when you the UFO stories where the car dies, right?
Right.
So his car dies. He's like, okay. So he gets out of the car, and the next thing he knows, he's in Mexico.
Wow.
So the kicker to this, though, is this guy goes to the local police station to find out where the hell he is. They tell him that he's in some town in Mexico. I forget where it was he ended up. He's several hundred kilometers away from where he was. The cops call the hotel, and the hotel personnel go outside, and they find his car sitting in the driveway of the hotel, still running. But the driver is in Mexico.
Yeah.
Those are the unbelievable stories.
Yeah. Well, I have heard a few like that in the past.
There's several of them in the book.
But that's really weird. With the car even actually running yet.
This car is still going, and he got out of the car because it stopped. So, okay, how did that happen? But the teleportation ranges from, there's another one where a doctor and his wife are driving down the road, and they drive into this cloud again in that Bahia Blanca area, and they end up in Mexico with the car. With the car. The whole thing translates almost instantaneously to Mexico.
Do you believe, is there any lost time involved with any of these? Or is this just instantaneous?
In the circumstance with the gentleman in the hotel, almost no time.
Okay.
He long enough for him to go find a police station and then call the hotel, but it was a short enough period of time to where they could go out and find his car sitting there running. The doctor, if I remember, he and his wife disappeared for a short period of time. They don't have any cognizance of how long they were gone, but the next thing they knew, they were in Mexico, and they ended up having to drive back to Argentina.
Well, that's nuts.
Yeah,
that's really nuts.
So, and then there's a smaller scale case where a young girl comes out of the front door of her house and walks into a yellow fog. And ends up, she's on the outskirts of the city that they lived in, ends up downtown instantaneously. Goes to somebody's house and ask for help, and they take her to the police station, and they call her parents to come get her but they have no idea how she got there. And it's one of the brothers or somebody saw her actually walk into the cloud.
Oh yeah.
And disappear, and they were, of course, freaking out until the cops called to tell them that, oh yeah, your kid is down here.
Wow.
So it's like, so do these clouds sometimes hide portals that
Well, you would think
take you to
that's what's
different
going
places?
on. Yeah, I mean, once again, Peace, thanks so much for generous donations. Really, really appreciated. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
the first
so-
thing I'm thinking is that, well, it either hit a portal or something abducted it for whatever reason. But
yeah,
you hear all these
somebody
stories like,
beamed you up and then beamed you back down.
yeah, you hear all these missing 411 stories and such, where people just suddenly disappear. And the first thing I think of is, well, they walked into something, a portal or something, and got taken to another dimension, another reality, another location on this reality.
Yeah. And I talk about fairy lore in the book, and it's a very, I mean, everybody wants to talk about aliens when you talk about abduction, but the original abductors were the fairy folk, and it wasn't at all uncommon for someone to, to encounter the fairy were known to use mist and fog to obscure their presence, right? So it wasn't all uncommon for someone to encounter these beings in the fog and end up in fairyland. And sometimes they got out, and sometimes they didn't. And when they did get out, there was that displacement of time, because they would think that they had been dancing with the fairy for a week, and they'd actually been gone for a year or something along that line. So
that's like the changeling stories. Those things used to freak me out when you used to read those things.
Yeah, I love that thing where that it's like, okay, well, we have a changeling child here, so what we have to do is put it on a shovel and hold it over the fire. And then the fairies will come and get it and bring our baby back.
Oh man.
Yeah. And,
I wonder what the origin of a lot of those stories are. Were people actually abducting babies, and it turned out that they started believing that fairies were doing it? Or do you have any idea of that? I know this is off topic.
Again, it's off topic, but that's okay, because I live for this stuff. So I think that in the changeling stories we have, again, this is one of those things where you can't say this is the cause. Because what you have is a whole series of things. Sometimes I think what happened was that the child simply had some kind of wasting disease that back in that time they couldn't identify, they couldn't diagnose, and so there was an explanation that the child had been taken by the fairy. Remember that the fairy were intimately associated with the dead in Celtic lore too. So, there was that kind of crisscross where, if someone had an illness like that, a lot of times it got attributed to the fairy. There are certainly circumstances where there are spirits that prey on human beings. Those incidences can be traumatic and can produce, I think, a type of PTSD that results in wasting. And then, it's entirely possible that, that someone was taking, that occasionally someone took a baby and replaced it with somebody else's baby that was dying. That could happen. And, the fairy have a long history of relationship with human beings. And so it's not, in my mind, beyond the realm of possibility. We know that, for instance, certain clans in Scotland were known to be terrific pipers because they had made bargains with the fairy, that there were clans in Ireland who became terrific fiddlers the same way. And then we go way down the rabbit hole to the whole idea of meeting the devil at the crossroads and all that stuff. But so, who's to say that the fairy aren't borrowing kids occasionally? I'm certainly not going to say that couldn't happen, because, I've known some folks who were intimately associated with the fairy and can tell you some really, really weird stories.
Me too. And I was just going to
Yeah.
say that I have had people who have had it. They swear they have had encounters with these things. I mean, it even got me believing them. And, I'm not necessarily into the fairy lore, but of course I'm going to listen to anybody and try to figure out what they're trying to tell me. But, some of this stuff is pretty interesting. And, I'm not going to doubt anybody, I mean, you do.
Yeah. I've had enough weird stuff. Well, okay. So good example.
Okay.
I was doing an interview for another podcast and talking about UFOs, because this person has a particular interest in that area, and we had the damnedest time with sound that day. It
happens.
It happens, I mean, sometimes we had trouble with sound. My headphones wouldn't work, we had a couple of really strong glitches, where things just wouldn't work at all. I'm sure he had to do some pretty extensive editing on that show to get it to come out right. So, I mean, this kind of stuff happens and everybody wants to go, oh, well, that's just coincidence.
Well, it's interesting.
It's coincidence if it happens once.
Yeah.
But when it happens to all the time, that goes beyond the realm of coincidence.
It seems anytime I'm doing a show about clearings and people being possessed and such, we always start getting gremlins and we start getting disembodied voices over the audio. That's happened many times with me.
Oh yeah.
And and I always warn the guest, look, just be aware of it. It always happens, it usually does happen to some degree. But
do what we can to prevent technical issues, but
absolutely.
It's
the phenomena just follows some of us, and I guess I'm pretty used to it. But sometimes you get a guest that's kind of freaked out by it. So.
Yeah, well, I've seen enough weird crap in my life.
Well, you and me both. Yeah. You also talk about vampires.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So give me a good vampire story.
Okay. Well, basically what happened is I went down a rabbit hole because a certain author that I had been reading maintained that vampires were shape-shifting creatures that were able to turn themselves into fog. And I thought, I've read that in, fiction books. Dracula does it, right? So I wonder if there's any basis in lore for that. So I went down the rabbit hole looking for, because to me, it's always about the stories, it's like, and it may be a witness account, or it may be some of the folklore, because those old folks actually knew what they were talking about. Everybody wants to think that, folklore is just, the stories of superstitious people who didn't know any better, but they actually knew how to associate with the spirits that they were having contact with on a regular basis. Call them spirits of the land, whatever you want to call them. So I went looking for stuff about vampires in particular, and of course the deepest well of lore for vampire stuff is in Eastern Europe. And I went hunting for this, are vampires able to turn themselves into fog and mist? And the answer is somebody probably made that up. But there, with the caveat that there are several stories in the lore of a vampire being able to enter the house through a keyhole or a chimney, like a la Santa Claus, right? So one of the things you had to do if you feared that you had a vampire infestation was be sure that your house was guarded by garlic and whatever on any place, any little place where the vampire could get through. So there's kind of the implication that the vampire is able to either make itself really small or make itself immaterial and make its way through these keyholes. I didn't get deeply into like witness accounts because modern day vampire culture is I'm not going to say that it's not reliable, but there's a lot of people fantasizing about these creatures.
Yeah, I agree.
And what they do. And it's really hard to separate the wheat from the chaff when you get into those stories. I'm again, like you, I'm always willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But you read some of these things and you're like, okay, you read that in a Twilight novel. So mostly what I focused on when I was doing the vampire section was, are they able to make themselves into Mr. Fogg? And the answer is kind of maybe.
It's interesting. You talk about that, and I just thought of something about alien encounters, and when they're like their long-term thing where it happens continuously. I have had cases of people contacting me about them having. I don't know how you've heard this before or not, of actual alien beings being able to transmute into some type of electrical energy or some type of Mr. Fogg and travel through electric conduits and water conduits in a house to get in.
Yeah.
Have you heard about it? Heard anything like that?
Yeah, it may have been something that I read on your blog.
Probably.
I seem to recall having seen that somewhere. There's also plenty of stories where the aliens just seem to walk through the walls. And when I read that kind of stuff, again, both and thinker. I think it's entirely possible that we may be being visited by beings from other worlds. I just don't necessarily think those worlds are, off in the galaxy somewhere and they're flying around in spaceships.
Oh, I don't either.
Because
that's a big bugaboo I have. I don't think these things are going interstellar space and showing up here. They're coming here for the most part by some type of rift or portal or wormhole or whatever you want to call it. And they may actually be closer than we think. I mean, they may just be in a linear dimension.
Right.
So.
I mean, if we accept that idea from the new physics that there are alternate dimensions, then who the hell knows how many of those dimensions there are and what lives there and what sort of interface that dimension has with ours.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, I'm willing to believe that there are beings coming from other worlds, but those worlds may not be next to Alpha Centauri.
Absolutely.
They may be right next door. But I'm struck a lot of times reading abduction encounters, and again, I don't want anybody to take this as me poo-pooing the abduction experience.
Okay.
I absolutely believe that there's something happening to these people.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure what it is, but there's absolutely something happening to these people. I am never, ever going to say that it's not the case. But I'm often struck by the idea or the thought that some of these encounters seem to be happening out of body.
Oh, I think it does. I think there are some some ethereal encounters.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because
where
you have these encounters where the aliens appear in the room. They seem to walk through the doors. They take the people out of the room through the wall. And and you may not even necessarily see a ship. They just suddenly make a transition into another place where you have the typical examination thing going on and all that stuff. I'm struck by the idea that these beings may be more spiritual than people are wanting to admit. It's a lot like the Sasquatch conundrum, where everybody wants this to be a flesh and blood creature that they can go out and put a bullet in and they can drag it back and prove to science that they exist. Everybody wants the UFO experience and the abduction experience to be a nuts and bolts thing, where if we put a missile in this thing, you'd shoot it down and you'd be able to go collect the parts or whatever. And I don't, I called my book Mysteries in the Mist for a reason. It's because I believe in the mystery of this, and I love the mystery of it. That's why I continue to research these things and why I'm so interested in them and why I can sit and talk about them for hours if given a chance. It's not because I think I'm ever going to solve anything. It's because, look, you have to have that love of mystery to be in this field, because you're never going to get an explanation. You can theorize a whole bunch, but we're not going to get real, like, okay, this is exactly what happened, and we recovered these bodies, and now we can say definitively that these people are from Alpha Centauri or whatever. Just don't see that happening. Now, I could be wrong.
No, but I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. There is something else behind all this. I have been saying for a while now that the whole cryptid, UFO, alien phenomena, there's ties and there's a lot of similarities there. Are they ultra-terrestrial beings? Are they able to come through, all of them able to come through portals, or able to manifest in our earth plane and then, then vanish again and go back into where they came from? I think as time has gone by, people are being more open to that. For a biggest reason is there's just no physical evidence of these things for anything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no bodies or anything to that, and beyond that, there's just not much of anything.
And if there ever is a body, it seems like it always disappears before anybody can get a chance to look at it.
Yeah. Then there's that, Yeah.
And then you have the fun things like the tracks that go across the cornfield and then disappear in the middle of the cornfield. It's like, okay, well, there's physical evidence that something was here and then it disappeared.
Right.
How did that happen? I think that we have to be open to the idea that there's something much more complex going on than maybe what we want to admit. Because we want to be able to put things in nice, neat little boxes and say, okay, this is what a Sasquatch is, or whatever phenomena you're talking about. There are pterodactyls flying around in the forest. Maybe there are time rifts opening and pterodactyls are flying around and then flying back in.
Yeah, exactly.
I was a big fan of a British show called Primeval that had these anomalies that would open and weird creatures would come out. It's like, yeah, like that. I could believe that.
So, Travis, why don't you tell folks how they can get a hold of you, get your books, and get any more information? If you have anything going on coming up, or you're going to appear anywhere else?
Okay, so no, the conference thing and whatever is kind of dead in the water right now with the whole COVID thing.
Yeah, I know.
But Mysteries in the Mist is available on Amazon, as you can see by your graphic there. It's available on Kindle. You can get a paperback copy. So it's available in both forms. And I believe it's been available on Kindle Unlimited as well if you have that subscription.
Mm-hmm.
As far as getting hold of me, I have an author page on Facebook at W.T. Watson, author. And I also have a personal account. I'm also available on Twitter, W.T. Watson, at W.T. Watson 2, I believe. And if you're an Instagram person, I'm Curunir, Curunir 60. And I welcome, interaction with people who've seen podcasts. I've had a couple of people who've come to me with reports since Phantom Black Dogs came out. I'm happy to talk with people about that sort of thing. And I think that's about it. As far as other things going, I'm going to be appearing on other podcasts, of course. I'm doing the circuit right now.
Yeah, I get it.
You know how that goes. I'm sure you've done that with your books as well.
Yep.
I'm working on something else right now. I have a contract that's going to come due in the summertime. So there will be more W.T. Watson nonfiction fun monster stuff coming out soon.
Yeah, I get it, because I'm already trying to figure out what my next one's going to be. We'll see.
Yeah, I see you're doing a book on the meme humanoids this time.
Yeah, this took a little bit of ingenuity, I think, on my part, because it's not really a subject that I'm really looking into, but I've been I thought it deserved a book, so I did what I could with it.
It's just so interesting. I'm really interested in this idea of things like the Slender Man, where something that started off as a creepypasta story suddenly seems to take on a life of its own.
It's bizarre.
And we have to start thinking in terms of thought forms and tulpas and that kind of thing when we start to talk about those kinds of sightings, and those beings seemingly having influence over people. Either that, or we have to talk about, there must be a spirit that's picking up on this energy and using it. One of the two things seems to be most likely to me, but like I said, I can go on and on. So.
Well, Travis, thanks again for coming on the show tonight. I appreciate it. And you let me know when the book next one come out. I will know, because Shannon will let me know. And so you take care and you have a good weekend.
Yeah, thanks very much for your time tonight. And everybody out there, stay creepy. Keep looking for stuff. I've loved Phantoms and Monsters for as long as it's been out there, and it's one of those things that keeps me in stories when I'm in between projects. So,
wow, that's what they're for. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Lon.
You take it out. Now, if you have an unexplained encounter or sighting, feel free to contact me directly at Lon Strickler at phantomsandmonsters.com or through the Phantoms and Monsters blog site. I want to again thank W.T. Watson for joining me this evening. And thanks to each and all you for watching and chatting. If you made a super chat donation, and specifically to Peace for all the amount they gave tonight, it's much appreciated. Your support is what makes this possible, and please like, subscribe, and share. Now, my new book, The Meme Humanoids, Modern Myths or Real Monsters, is now available on Amazon.com. It's on Kindle, and it's in paperback as well. So next week, we're going to have a cryptid roundtable with several investigators and researchers. I think most of these people I've never interviewed before, so it should be an informative session. So until that time, stay healthy and have a safe and enjoyable weekend. Good night.